absolutely thrilled now to welcome Professor Barry Gilbertson, who's had his own engagement with the UN system, actually, including for 6 years. He was just telling me, advising the UN on how to help developing countries manage their real estate for the good of their societies and their countries. And is also, has just stepped down actually, as the chair of the City of Bath UNESCO World Heritage Site Advisory Board and Enhancement Fund. And Barry's going to talk to us about the heritage of the City of Bath, which I think we all know in outline is absolutely fantastic. And Barry is going to communicate to us just how fantastic it is in his presentation. Then if there's time, I'll have some questions and answers afterwards. So Barry, thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you. So, from my point of view, welcome to Bath. It is a unique city in many, many ways, and I hope to be able to show you some of that. This is all going to be a little bit strange because the IT system here, if I said it was antiquated, you know, when was the UN formed? I mean, this could have been here then. But it means that I can't see what's actually on the screen most of the time. So if I have to come over here, unfortunately, in order to change the slide. And I'm going to try and move around so I won't be standing in someone's way all of the time. Because I can't go over there because I can't control the slides. So having said all that, so what you have here, let's see how far I can go before that goes off. No, we're okay. So what you have here is this is the UNESCO World Heritage emblem, which I will talk to you a little bit more about. But this big bronze artifact, I suppose you could call it, was put in Stall Street, which you'll have seen if you've been walking around the city. Stall Street, and there in 1987 when we got our first World Heritage inscription. And this road here joins, if I'm standing at where the Roman baths are, they at the far end are the cross baths, and that's two of Bath's 3 hot springs, and the third one is just around the corner to the left-hand side, where if you were to walk there, you would see a big modern glass building. That's the Thermae Spa, which we did in Bath as a Millennium project and was only 7 years late. You know, you might have thought they'd have thought about planning it a little earlier, but never mind. It's a huge attraction, brings in a lot of revenue to the city. It has a rooftop swimming pool and 4 layers of ways in which you can enjoy the hot spa. And that uses the third of our 3 hot springs, called the Hetling Spring. And if you walk down there, you'll see the word Hetling emblazoned on the wall from around 1780. And one of the things we try to do in Bath is to protect our environment, and I'm going to talk to you about how we try to protect the environment. But if you just stand and look there, you'll see these beautiful columns down one either side, and this is called Bath Street because it links 2 of the baths. And those columns were put there originally, or built there, in order that the sedan chair carriers could wait, even though it might be raining, they could wait in the dry. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen a sedan chair close up, but they're heavier than you imagine. And then you put inside that an 8-stone lady or a 15-stone man, and then you have 2 burly blokes who run with it, with a pole on either side, one at the front, one at the back, and they run with it. And of course, because Bath is on hills, actually it was the main method of public transportation, because people very rarely brought their own carriages down into the centre of the city, other than when they first arrived, because the roads obviously would get very slippy on the side of the hills. So this was enormously important, because if you came to Bath for the season, and the season runs from somewhere around October through until May, It's a winter season because Bath is in a bowl of hills, and that bowl of hills means we very rarely get snow, we don't get a lot of frost and ice, but we do get quite a lot of rain, interestingly, just one of those phenomenons. So it was really important for people to be able to come to the baths, because many people would come to the bath season not just for fun and frolics and gambling and what stays in Las Vegas stays in Bath sort of thing, but they came to take the waters because they believed there was a cure. And it was Queen Anne who in 1702 who actually granted Bath a royal charter because of its spas. Now, when you think about Bath, what I try to encourage people to think about, no, that's not done it? Oh dear. Has it brought it back? Yes, it has, in which case let's try that. These are the two things I try to encourage people to think about when you're thinking about Bath. And if you look, there's architecture all around us. Most of it is Georgian. And the landscape around us, because of the bowl of hills, the landscape is part of our World Heritage Site. And I will show you a map shortly that demonstrates that. And as you can see on the screen, the outstanding universal value are the things that set a World Heritage Site apart from anywhere else, in the sense that UNESCO believes that if you have outstanding universal value, and Bath in the 1987 inscription has 6, and I'm going to talk about each of those 6, it is of universal value to humanity around the world. And that's a really important criterion. So moving on from there is this agenda, what I'm going to try and talk about. So I might get distracted, and please, if you've got a question, it's a lot easier to ask it at the end, and that's only really because I often answer the questions on the way through without knowing you having asked it. And so they are the 4 headings about which I'm going to talk, but it does say at the bottom that I'm very happy to answer questions, but also not just now, but later, and I'll give you my communication details right at the end if you want to follow up. And as I always say with these talks, I will follow up. I will answer the questions and give you some more information. Now, this is that scarily large picture of me. I was actually sitting on a barge at the time on the Pontycastilty World Heritage Viaduct, a canal viaduct in North Wales. But I like people to get some idea of my background, hopefully to justify some of the things I'm going to say, but also in your case, as your president kindly mentioned, I spent 6 years as a volunteer on this United Nations group. And if anybody here might remember the name Geoffrey Hamilton, well, Geoffrey was our main contact. He appointed me to that group, and in fact I chaired the valuation subgroup within that for 6 years because I have a background as a chartered surveyor, even though I was a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers. And the other thing about that United Nations thing, just to get a handle on why it was important, is because helping developing countries to develop a real estate property market is really critical to their economy, because most of the developing countries don't have a land registry, a name you will remember, which helps to define who owns what in a country, and then moving on from that, getting the right kind of advisors to come in and advise people as to how it all works. So that was the basis of what we were trying to do. And when I retired from full-time work, I set off with my wife and we said, let's try and see if we can get a bit of travel in, because although I have indeed worked or given speeches and conferences in some 32 countries, my wife was very often not with me, and so I wanted to make sure that we did some travel together. And this is where you get to play your part, because there's a lot of information on this slide, but there's a lot of information on quite a few of the slides. And so I propose to talk about something to do with the slide while you're reading the slides. I know that's easier for the ladies than it is for the men. You know, multitasking chaps, not so simple, is it? You know, trying to cope with several things at once. But anyway, this, I really thought, we were traveling in South America at the time, and we were in Bolivia. And you know, when we were traveling by train, and you know, in the center of Bolivia, the ladies wear their traditional costume and their bowler hat in La Paz. And then as we were traveling through the countryside, every little village has its own costume. And every little village, as you went past it on the train, you could see people working in the fields wearing their own costume. So that was all about culture and heritage. And it made me think as to why culture and heritage are so important. And it is because, as I say here, they're the only things left now with the internet and all these other examples that I've given you, as to why culture and heritage are so important. Now, I said I'd come back to the emblem, and as you can see at the top, I'll tell you, for those that the angle's too difficult, it symbolizes the interdependence of cultural and natural attributes. And I always say to people that if I sat you in a room for half an hour with a pen and a piece of paper, you'd probably not figure out what the circle stood for or what the square stood for. So I'm going to tell you, to save you worrying about it. As you can see on the screen, the square represents human skill and inspiration, and the circle wrapping around the whole thing represents nature. So, talking of nature, here is some amazing falls in South America, just on the border between Argentina and Brazil. And these falls are amazing. There are anywhere between 175 and 275 actual drops of water coming over into the falls from a height of just over 100 feet generally. And it's an amazing, amazing place as a World Heritage Site. And as you can see, I left a little bit of the barrier in down here just to show I was there. Looking at these amazing falls, but it shows really about this question about what UNESCO is all about, and this question of building peace in the minds of men and women and trying to excel in response to that. It's no coincidence that building peace links to being established in 1945. And sometime after 1945, I can't remember quite when, but in the early 2000s, my wife and I went down and did a Nile cruise. And amongst the things that you get to see, because all around the world, tourism companies steer their itineraries by World Heritage Sites. Because in general, they know that taking the visitors to a World Heritage Site, they're not going to feel let down because there's something really interesting and impressive to see. Now here, you'll have read about the monuments of Nubia. If nothing else, you'll have read what it says on top there. And that funding was the first time that a country tried to get some funding for a big, big project. And that $80 million would be about $280 million today for this one project. And you can see the size of it. To get a flavour of the size of what I'm going to talk about, here is a person. These are all people down here. And these are the even further tiny people at the entrance to these temples. Now these temples are modern in the sense that they were taken down and rebuilt. And that was what the project was about, because if they built the Aswan Dam, these temples would have been swallowed up by the water, and then they would have been lost to humanity. And what the project was about was picking them up stone by stone, brick by brick, so to speak, and moving the whole thing 200 meters further away from its current location and 60 meters up, so that it was well above the waterline of the Nile. So actually an incredible project, although it was an incredible project in itself when you look at the date that King Ramses II organized such an amazing project. And to give you an idea of the size, here's Ramses on this one here. And this is also Ramses here. And this skip, so-called, it's not really a skip, that skip contains 20 tons of stone. 20 tons of stone equates to around 3 of our coaches in this country. They weigh around 7 tons apiece. And you can see the men trying to reposition his head into that slot. And you know it's the new work, it's the work being done, because there is the blue skies clearly indicate that it's not taking the original apart, it's rebuilding it. And look at how they did it in all those years ago, well over 3,000 years ago. They did it by creating a slot for the head to slide into. Now, whatever else you think, that methodology in itself would be fantastically surprising. And so when you come across and look at these numbers, you can see that having had the idea just after, and that was the creation of UNESCO in 1945, and then the monuments of Nubia in the middle to late 60s, it wasn't until 72 that we had the first World Heritage Convention, because obviously World Heritage is just one aspect of the many things that UNESCO do. And you can see the first 12 sites were 6 years later, and I can tell you that today it takes on average 10 years from being somebody having the idea of creating a World Heritage Site nomination to actually going through the annual World Heritage Committee, which is held just once a year, and it takes on average 10 years to get that far. In the old days, the paperwork used to be this sort of height, full of detail that the committee would have scrutinized on the way through. These days, of course, you can fit it onto a memory stick. And that's just advancement for you. And sometimes advancement works, and sometimes, like today, it doesn't work quite as well as we would hope. Now, you might wonder, the first World Heritage Sites included places like the Galapagos Islands and Quito, the capital of Ecuador. And then in 1983, the UK signed, and it took another 4 years. People were already working on the hope that we could get a World Heritage Site, but we didn't join until 1983. And the first World Heritage sites in this country, they tried to do at least one from each of the 4 countries. And so the Giant's Causeway was one, for example. And then we continued to grow and grow and grow. And today, as you'll see a little bit further on, there are 1,199 World Heritage Sites around the world. And of them, there are 192 participating state territories or countries, and there are only 2 that are not actually signed up to the convention. One is Liechtenstein, and the other one is the phosphate island of Nauru off the coast of Australia, where there are just 12,000 people. So there, every other country and state territory is involved within the convention now. But as you can see, in 2021, Liverpool was delisted, and that's one of only 3.5 World Heritage Sites that have actually lost their listing across the years. And worryingly, there are 56 on the danger list across 35 countries, but you can well imagine, and without putting any kind of political bias on the point at all, Ukraine has suffered, and obviously Israel and Gaza, their World Heritage Sites are suffering, Syria suffering, but it takes a lot to lose a World Heritage inscription. And if you ask me at the end, I will happily describe the 3.5 for you. So rather than get diverted down a rabbit hole now, you can ask me if you're interested, because this is what everybody signs up to identify, protect, conserve, present, and to transmit, and by transmit they mean pass on to future generations, sites of universal value. And what happens is that you find that the state party, so in this country it's the UK government, is responsible for its World Heritage Sites, of which there are 33. They devolve that responsibility to Scotland and separately to Northern Ireland. They don't devolve it to Wales in quite the same way, but there are 33 of them, and in our case we have one local authority. So we're right at the top here. UNESCO passes the responsibility to government in this country, and it's the Department of Media, Culture and Sport, and whatever it's changed its name to this week, I'm not sure. They devolve it to the local authority, in this case Bath and North East Somerset. We have an advisory board which contains about 28 people from 21 different organisations, from national organisations down to regional organisations, down to local organisations, and 2 representatives of residents' organisations here in the city. And this next one across, where Professor Marion Harney is, she took over my role. I was in place for 7 years, and Marion took over just at the end of April, when I and my wife decided to move away from Bath, which might seem a strange thing to do, but we've moved closer to our grandchildren, and I don't suppose anybody is going to criticise us for doing that. They're currently aged 2 and 6, so they feel a bit like half a crown, but you're not all old enough to remember that kind of currency, are you? And so this is the enhancement fund about which I'm going to talk. The bronze heritage plaques you'll have seen around the city, various bronze plaques denoting different people who have been and stayed in the city or lived in the city, and we'd really dearly love to get it back running. It stopped at the Second World War. You won't find any after the Second World War. It started actually in 1896, quite amazingly. And these days, trying to convince the council and trying to convince organisations like the Bath Preservation Trust, Me Too and all those other Black Lives Matter and things do get in the way of people saying we have to be very cautious about honouring different people. And I think that's a strange approach, because I think if the person genuinely deserves it, then they should be honoured with such a plaque. But I'm not going to get into the politics of all of that right now. But I am going to mention, here is the 1987 inscription, and in 2021 we were awarded a second inscription as a leading member at that, of the Great Spa Towns of Europe. And that I'll say more about shortly. But the amazing thing, and why I dared to say that the city of Bath is a unique and beautiful city, is because out of the 1,199 World Heritage Sites, only 22 are double inscribed. Just 22. And that makes us pretty special if it doesn't make us unique. Now, I mentioned outstanding universal value previously, and you can recognize all of those, I'm sure. The top left is, come on. You can do it. No, yeah. No, the Great Wall is on top right. Are you having trouble with your left and your right? No. Oh, you can't hear. Sorry. Okay, so yes, the Great Wall of China, of course, yes. And down here is Uluru. You would know it perhaps as Ayers Rock, but of course we have to call it Uluru. When we were at Uluru, I took this photograph from, gosh, it's hard to be sure exactly how far I was away. Something like 5 miles away. It is huge. It's 5 miles, actually, just over 5 miles around the perimeter of this one rock. And when we were there, our guide said to us, "I need you to run." And we said, "Well, we just had lunch. You know, why do we run?" And he said, "Because it's going to rain, and it only rains twice a year." And at that point, we were about 800 yards away. And he said, if we run, we'll get down there, we'll get into the dry before it rains, because when it rains, it really, really rains. And he said, as soon as it rains, every other tour guide from everywhere around the outside will be driving here, and you'll get to see it before they all arrive. And indeed, we did, because it's flat on the top and collects puddles of water, which then turn into waterfalls. So here you are, right in the middle of the desert, and there's waterfalls. Just incredible. And talking of incredible, the one on the bottom right, of course, is this wonderful city of Bath, and the circus designed by John Wood the Elder. He never saw it built, because John Wood was an amazing surveyor come architect. He developed the centre of the city from 1720 onwards. And if you go down and when you're out walking you spot the Raven pub, you should just look at the street names around it, because John Wood was so keen to get on and develop Bath, and he saw it as a real opportunity, and he went to the council meeting, as they had in those days, to get the names of his roads approved, and the meeting was taking forever. So one hears, I wasn't there, but this was meeting taking a very long time, and he jumped up and said, "When are you going to get on to my bit? When are you going to get on to naming my roads?" And the chairman of the council, or the mayor at that time, said, "Quiet, John Wood." And so he went away and he named Quiet Street, Wood Street and John Street. And they're all there around the Raven pub. I like to think that's true. I have no idea. So I said I'd mention all 6 of the different attributes of outstanding universal value. The map you can see, this is the red line is the entire city in 1987. The entire city and some of the surrounding countryside. So we are sitting currently about here, just on the bend of the river, where the base of the town was built. You can't, the centre is a conservation area as well, but you can't see that. And you can see the 6 names down the side. Now I'm going to stay here so that we can flick through these reasonably quickly for you. So this is the head of Sulis Minerva, and this was found in 1727 when they were digging some sewers outside where the Roman Baths entrance is in Stall Street, just not very far away from where that big emblem, the big bronze emblem, is buried in the pavement. And what is amazing about this, and if you go to the Roman Baths you'll see it, there's a nice feature, it is there, it's on show, and it is 7 layers of gilding. 7 layers of gilding, probably built somewhere around the 2nd century, to use the AD terms. So 7 layers of gilding, and the top 2 layers are all gold leaf. Simply amazing. But what that did was it gave some real positioning to where to later in the Victorian times they started to excavate the site of the Roman baths, the King's Bath. They knew they were there somewhere, but they didn't know precisely where different bits of it were or where the Roman temple was, and this gave them a very good clue when the workmen dug it up in 1727. The second one is the hot springs. Now again, if you go to the Roman baths and go downstairs, you'll see this same feature. The yellow is the salts and the minerals that flow from the water. The water was apparently deposited as rain 10,000 years ago or something similar. And it was deposited in the Malvern Hills, so quite away from here, and has come down over the years, over the centuries, by geology and faults in the rocks. And what you get in the hot springs here, the 3 hot springs, come out at 46 degrees centigrade, and you're looking at something in the order of 1 million litres a day flowing out of the water. And why is that important? Why is 46 degrees important? Well, apparently, to be a hot spring, you need to have the water flowing out of the earth at 45 degrees or more. And we're 1 degree above the benchmark. So elsewhere in the UK, you go to Buxton or somewhere else, they can only claim to have warm springs. Their publicity might say hot springs, but they're not over 45 degrees centigrade, or so I'm told. So that's the second one. Then the third one. Now this is important because this is a plan of the city which was, you could argue, was mainly created by John Wood the Elder and continued by his son John Wood the Younger. But up the top you can see the circus, and that was as far as John Wood the Elder got. He died, as I said, in 1754. The circus was completed by his son in 1766, 1767, and there are 30 houses in those 3 terraces. And perhaps the most, apart from the fact that it was the first circular street to be built in England, perhaps the most interesting or intriguing thing about it is that its diameter is 330 feet. And 330 feet is exactly the diameter of Stonehenge. And even more amazingly, if you were to go to Orkney and look at their stone circle, which isn't like Stonehenge, but it's very low-level stones, that is also 330 feet diameter. Now you tell me how 330 feet gets between all these places. So a lot of people say that John Wood the Elder was interested in Freemasonry. Others say he was interested in Stonehenge. And other people say, well, the circus, when you look at it, looks like the Colosseum in Rome, but the other way around. So instead of having the columns on the outside, all the columns are on the inside. And up at the top area, you'll see the Royal Crescent on the top left-hand side. And that was developed by John Wood the Younger, his son. And that is the Royal Crescent. It's a nice shot from below, but you don't really get the size of it. But when you look from above, you begin to see that it is an astonishing achievement. Again, it was the first crescent of houses to be built in this country, and that was around 1771. But it wasn't built by John Wood the Younger. It was built by a whole range of different developers, funded by a whole range of wealthy people. And why John Wood the Younger is involved is that he and his brother-in-law, Thomas Brock, they had to purchase what's called a building lease in Georgian times. So this field and the field on which the crescent is built were purchased for £200 a year, which was quite a lot of money in those days. That £200 a year bought them the right to commence building within 2 years. And once the buildings were complete, they entered into a more conventional lease with a ground rent. But by that time, of course, John Wood the Younger owned all the building, in the sense that he owned the land on which the buildings were built. And the first building to be built was this one here. This is number 1 Royal Crescent, and there is a Georgian museum in there where I volunteered for 5 or 6 years, and they really set out to tell you what Georgian life was like. As you can see, the rest of the crescent, it was described in the publicity when it first came out, amazingly, as 500 yards of curved brilliance. Well, it's nothing like 500 yards. 500 yards is quite a long way. It's more like 500 feet, but it was printed as 500 yards. The centre one, where you can see what appears to be a tree growing up, the centre one is just to the left of that. And if you go up there, you'll know which is the centre one, because that's the one that has 2 columns close together, which you can see just here. And what they said when trying to describe the fact that each one is different, you can tell each one is different because if you stand, there's a sort of viewing space here that coach visitors often stand and look and then jump back into their coach, I'm afraid. But they do, and you can see from there that not all of the spaces between the chimney pots, the chimney stacks, are the same. And that's because the people who took the advantage to buy their piece of land first took a little bit more space than they were entitled to. And so they're not all the same, and they're certainly not all the same inside, although John Wood the Younger designed the outside. He said that they had to build the outside exactly to his specification, and inside they could do what they wished in terms of their rooms and room layouts. And to help them, he devised some room layouts and cupboards that fitted well into what is like a little cheese wedge shape of each of the buildings. So a tremendous achievement. They used to say, when talking locally, when describing the Royal Crescent, as being Queen Anne at the front and Mary Ann at the back, because the backs are all completely different, and some of them used to look a bit scruffy, but they don't now. There's a lot of money tied up in those buildings. And about 10 years, this row here, this is called Marlborough buildings. Because the wind comes from the southwest, which is down here, they decided that the people who were living there decided, well, why don't we club together and build ourselves a windbreak. So they built Marlborough buildings essentially as a windbreak to stop the wind bashing across the screen, so to speak. So that's the Royal Crescent. 2 more to go. This is 18th century social ambition. This is important because it's one of the reasons people came to Bath. It was a marriage market in many ways, and it had all levels of high society, from royalty down through nobility, down through the wealthy, but provided the wealthy weren't in trade, of course. They didn't want anybody mixing with them who was in trade, but nonetheless the social ambition was right, and they had the benefit of going to the baths to take the waters. And so what they used to say about Bath was, you come to Bath to take the waters and marry off your daughters. And that was important because in the late Georgian era, a woman was not entitled to own any property. And so all the time, a woman remained a living with daughter, if you will, that it be still the full responsibility of the father or of the family. There's some interesting characters here. You can see perhaps an old naval captain here who has got shot or whatever, and he's got in a very early forerunner of a Bath chair. You can see some very elegant ladies, and you can see this character here who reminds me of my father, and that is because my father was about 5'5". How I got to be 6 foot, I don't know, but he was about 5'5", And he always used to have, in my memory, a stomach that came out here, which he used to tap and call his corporation. Now, I have no idea. I never got to the bottom of why he called it his corporation. But the reason this chap has got a corporation, so to speak, is because their diet was very much worse than ours today. It was heavily protein-based and heavily root vegetable-based, and from around 1770, 1760 onwards, highly sugar-based, in the sense of the sweets and the puds that they would be served up with in each of these fabulous houses. And then lastly, you have this wonderful photograph. I shouldn't say that because I took it, but I mean it describes just why the green setting of the city is so important. You know, there are plenty of cities you can go to around the world and in this country where you hardly see a tree. And here we have a skyline walk right at the top, all the way around the city. You can get more than 2/3 of the way around the city on the skyline, and you're looking down on top. And so where are we? Well, here, this building here is the Empire Building, said to be, when it was built, one of the most hideous buildings ever built in this country, on the basis that the architect decided to make that bit a castle, that bit a country house, and that bit a cottage. Don't know, but it sits right on the corner, overlooking the rugby ground, and the rugby ground, of course, is in itself very important in the city. So they're the 6 attributes of outstanding universal value. And as you can see here, this is something that I bought in Venice as a schoolboy. It's black pen sprayed art. And it says there about there being only 2 cities in Europe. Various cities around the world will say that their city is a World Heritage Site. What they really mean to say is their city has a World Heritage Site. There are only the 2 in Europe. Quito, of course, was the first or the second, and Krakow, when it was inscribed in 1978, again is the centre of the city of Krakow. And as you know, Krakow has some very difficult connections with Nazi Germany, to put it in its simplest terms. But that's another reason why Bath is so important. Now, take a moment or two to read what it says on the screen and think about when that might have been written. Our population today is 92,000 in the city. And that 92,000 in the city today includes students. And students don't pay council tax. Okay, so, any idea when it might have been written? Go on, come on, you can sing it out. 1950s? 60s? 70s? 80s? 90s? No, it was in fact 1960s. 70s from the Diaries of Richard Crossman, who, as you remember, was a cabinet minister, and it seemed to me to sum up the difficulties that Bath faces. In these days, in the 70s and before, Bath was known as the Queen of the West. But of course, with very little government funding coming into the city, even then, and almost nothing now, I have to tell you. The current council, Bath and North East Somerset, which covers the city and the surrounding towns and villages around, today has to spend 84% of its budget on social care. 84% of its budget on social care. And the real difficulty that they have, of course, even with Bath as a fabulous city, is having enough resources to pay really good people to deal with all the very many issues that it faces as a city in a modern world. So a few facts very quickly. I'm not going to run through them all, but you can see all of just about everything on there gives you a flavour of why the city is so important, so interesting. the highest concentration of grade 1 and grade 2 listed buildings outside London. So let's look briefly at what it says down here. It's got this unique ability to directly monetize its world heritage via the Roman baths. Prior to COVID, it was making around £6.5 million a year as the most profitable publicly owned local authority heritage attraction in the country. And just about a month ago, post-COVID, without the Chinese visitors in the main, without the Far East Asian visitors in the main, they announced that last year they made £8.5 million. And that £8.5 million, interestingly, doesn't come back to heritage or world heritage. It goes in to support the council tax because of that huge gap with only 16% other than social care. And so listed buildings, you can see there's a bit of a history there, and I won't read it all out, but if anybody wants a copy of the slides at the end, they're very welcome to have a copy. The important thing from Bath's perspective is that in 1880, they started to think about protecting their buildings, their big, important buildings. And then pre-war in Bath, there are various government bills that went through Parliament supporting Bath's heritage of its building structures, of particular buildings rather than a blanket. And then post-World War II, we have, beyond the Bath Blitz, two nights worth of Blitz destroying nearly everything south of here, down towards the river. And interestingly, they were, according to what one can read, that the bombers weren't actually trying to blitz Bath, they were actually aiming for Bristol. And where the docks were, obviously, and very important docks they were too. And so they had a thing called a Baedeker guide, which gave them the route, if you like, into towards Bristol. You fly over the channel, then you turn left at Limpley Stoke, which is about 4 miles from here, and follow the Limpley Stoke Valley, which is essentially the valley of the River Avon and the canal, and you follow that as far as Bristol. And on one or other of the two nights, either people saw the lights of Bath and dropped their bombs here and went away, or they went on to Bristol, perhaps had a problem with dropping their bombs or too much flak, who knows, turning around, coming back and dropping the bombs on Bath. And so that led to not just Bath's blitz, but elsewhere. It led to the then Ministry of Public Buildings and Works saying we must do something about protecting those buildings that survive, which was called initially the salvage list, and that was in 1944. And what the ministry said was, let's get every architect we can, every engineer, every surveyor we can, to go in their local area and tell us what buildings should be preserved, if possible. And the first list, as it says, was issued in 1947, and we have these ones here. The Mr. and Mrs. Code, they set out, they were both architects, and they sketched everything they could. Before it was pulled down, if it had been demolished by the Blitz, and sketching almost everything that was of any value. And these books are in themselves are completely fascinating. And Adam Ferguson wrote a series of articles in the Times because he was very concerned about what he called the sack of Bath, which was all of these demolished areas. What he was arguing for was putting back stuff that looked something like the original, the Georgian, because south of here it was all the artisan buildings rather than the posher buildings which were on the hill. And that led to various big brutalist architecture blocks being built in Bath. There's two just along from the theatre. If you go past the theatre and just head west a little bit, you'll see some of the brutalist blocks that are there. One of them now contains the Apex Hotel, and they've done their best to make that as good as possible, and it is perfectly reasonable in today's terms. But there's also a big telephone exchange up there, real 1970s brutalist big square blocks. Anyway, that's part of our history, and we have to live and work with that. And as you can see with some of the statistics you have here, this is almost the most important thing. If your building is listed, you have to get listed building consent from your local authority to either demolish it, extend it, or alter it significantly, depending on whether you're grade 1, grade 2 star, or grade 2. There used to be a grade 3, but that was absorbed into grade 2 some years ago. But there are around 400,000 listed buildings, which, as it says, is about 2% of UK buildings. So valuable to us in Bath and valuable to many other towns, cities and villages. A few images now just to talk about some of the things that Bath is famous for. This is Pulteney Bridge. Now Pulteney Bridge, as you can see the sort of dates on top here, this is the original bridge. There have been various attempts to repair it. What the original design didn't take account of, but even though you're building this stone down into the river is very soft at that point, and today you would never build a bridge like this with just those stone footings. But the really important thing actually about this bridge is that it has shops on both sides. And Pulteney Bridge is only just there. If you go down to the jewellers on the corner and turn left, you'll walk straight across Pulteney Bridge. And there are only 4 bridges left in the world that have shops on both sides. There's a couple that are easy to see, easy to spot. You may have been here. This is the Rialto Bridge in Venice. This is the Ponte Vecchio up here in Florence. But does anybody know this bridge? It's a 13th century bridge in a little town called Erfurt in Germany, and it's known as the Merchants Bridge. So they're the only 4 bridges left in the world with shops on both sides. And this bridge, this brilliantly shaped bridge, is an attempt to replicate a bridge called a Templar, T-E-M-P-L-A, Templar Bridge, designed by Andrea Palladio in the 1500s. Palladio was one of the first modern, if you can count the 1500s as modern, architects to think about the ancient Greek orders of columns and their take on architecture, which made it timeless. And his style, which John Wood the Elder adopted throughout Bath, but it had changed by the time it got to John Wood the Younger. But the original style that John Wood the Elder adopted was essentially Palladianism, named after Andrea Palladio. And as you can see here, there are only 4 of them left in the world. They're all slightly different. Even the ones in this country are slightly different, but they're all based on Andrea Palladio's design. This one is here in Bath. This up the top here, the building that you can see is these days Prior Park College, and that's just to the east of Bath. You can walk there, but it's a steep old walk up the hill. That building was designed by the building behind as well as the bridge. The building behind was designed by John Wood the Elder, in order that the owner, Ralph Allen, who had made a lot of money as the first cross-country postmaster, he bought franchises effectively to manage the post, going not all the way back to London to come all the way out to Bristol, but, for example, a coaching line from Bath to Bristol, or Bath to Chichester or wherever it might be. So he made a lot of money out of that. And then he bought a lot of stone mines, which are up on the hill at Combe Down, and he asked John Wood, the elder, if he would build him something that was fantastic with a great palace front, so-called, so that he could sell more stone. And in order to sell more of his stone, he built a tramway, and you have to imagine that this is in the 1760s, to run the stone from the mines all the way down Prior Park Road, down to the canal and the river, and had a pulley system to get the empty trucks all the way back up to the top. A very inventive and entrepreneurial fellow, but those 4 bridges, of which we have one, are very special. I said I'd mention our other inscription in 2021, the Great Spa Towns of Europe. This, as it says here, was when we have it, this is a spa in Czech Republic, if I'm remembering correctly. And what happened was that the Czech Republic said to UNESCO, we'd like our hot spa to be a World Heritage Site. And it happened that several other countries had asked the same sort of question. And so what UNESCO said was, yes, but I tell you what, why don't you go out and come back to us, having done lots of research, and select the very best around Europe. And so a group was formed about 13 years ago now, and they set out to do the research, and they got to around 200 spa towns. Not all hot spas, some were cold spas, some were warm springs. And what's interesting is as they tried to narrow that 200 down, they got to 150, and Bath was either first or second on this list. They got down to 100, and Bath was still first or second under different criteria. And they got down to 50, and then down to 17, and then down eventually to 11. And UNESCO accepted the 11. And so we were granted our second inscription, which, as I say, makes us really quite special. And here's some of the stuff that flowed from that, some of the other spa towns, spa buildings. And off they went, and this is the town of Spa. So you don't need to be a big town. Midsummer Norton, it says there, the population of Spa is only 10,500, and it's smaller than Midsummer Norton, which is a town to the south here. And yet that spa attracted all of these people from notable professions, industries, or whatever in those early years. So from Bath's point of view, this is what we are trying to do all the time. We recognise that we have a responsibility. We recognise that it's important not just to protect stuff, but to enhance stuff, to think about how we educate and make people more aware of why World Heritage is so important. This, for example, is the last surviving residence sentry box. It's the last surviving circular sentry box in the country. We've restored it twice in the last 20 or 25 years, and it just sits there very happily in Bath on the corner of Norfolk Crescent, and these watch boxes are very important because they started off the police force system in this country. So ahead of the Bow Street Runners and other types of this, how you managed the watch boxes around your town or your city led to the formation of a police service. And we've been very fortunate with our status and the very industrious different groups and teams of people on these various projects to be able to leverage money. They collect a lot of money themselves. They get sharing opportunities and they also apply to the Heritage Lottery, and the Heritage Lottery has been very kind to Bath, as you can see in terms of the amount of money we've had from them on all of these restoration projects. And here's some numbers from tourism. Now, you'd like to think that I would be able to update these numbers, but of course, this was just immediately pre-COVID. We never saw any figures. We've never seen really any detailed figures from 2019, 20, 21, 22. And we're just beginning to see 2023's figures. But if you look at the number of visitors in a year, 6.25 million visitors in a year, and the 2 years before, it was 725,000 less. Now imagine what that does to the public realm spaces, the streets, the pavements, the yellow boxes, the white lines, all of that stuff. It's great to have the visitors here. Bath would be a sad place without the visitors, but you can see that it is worth a large amount of money, and those extra 750,000 people in those 2 years brought in an increase of 32 million pounds worth of money. And you can see the number of people staying in Bath is increasing all the time because more and more hotels, the hotels industry has taken Bath to its heart. And so we've now got a lot more hotel bed spaces than probably since, and even before, Georgian times. Now, this is important in terms of understanding Bath and what happens. If you look at this photograph, some of you will either see the word Amsterdam in the background or know that it's Amsterdam. And my son and I were sitting on a bench here waiting to go and see a football match. My son had long wanted to see Ajax play in Amsterdam, and so we went over to watch a match, and we sat there and thought about, I wonder how many people there are here living in Amsterdam. It's a capital city, of course, so it's quite a lot larger than Bath, but we found out that it was 813,000 residents against 4 million visitors, 14 million visitors, which gives you a ratio of 17 visitors for every single resident, man, woman and child. Now, if you think about applying that to Bath, as you can see, we're working on a population in the city of 89,000. You know, it doesn't compare. It's not even 1/8 of what Amsterdam gets. And that includes those 25,000 students. We've got 2 universities, Bath Spa, which is based out of the city by about a mile, and Bath University, which is the 7th best university in the country. And I can tell you that 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago now, it was the leading university less than 50 years old in the whole of Europe. And that's based here in our city. And both universities have got students living in the city, and they've got different buildings in the city as well as on the fringe. And then you look at what that does, you end up with 64,000 residents paying council tax, and the wear and tear leads you to a terrible, frightening statistic of 98 visitors to every single resident. And it's really, really important that ways are found to generate income from those people. For example, one of the things that we did in the circus was we managed to ban coaches going to the circus. So although that you might think that stops people seeing the circus, what we're trying to get them to do is to get out of the coach, come into the city and spend a little bit of money, rather than drive around the circus 3 times and then drive off, leaving us just their diesel fumes, for example. That's a horribly basic example, but you saw from some of those other statistics just how important it is that we get people to stay in the city. We have to have a management plan. Every single World Heritage Site around the world has to have a 6-year management plan, and we're getting close to finalising our next one, which will take us through to the year 2030. And when I was appointed in 2017, I went to see the chief executive. So that's an employee, not a council member. And that chief executive barely knew that we had a World Heritage Site. Now, I found it astonishing at the time. Many people find it astonishing even now. But part of that was the fact that other than the big one in Stall Street, much of this other stuff wasn't visible. I mean, this one here, this is at the railway stations. If you came by train, as you exit, you turn left and you exit, and there is a World Heritage symbol. It took us 4 years for Network Rail to approve us putting that on their glass. And we still, and that's been there for about 6 years, and we still don't have their permission to put up a little sign that tells people what it is. You know, it's baffling, isn't it? And these here, there are 2 of these signs. These are the signs that are on the Roman Baths building, and one of them is where the Mayor of Bath's guides start from. They start at 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, 364 days a year. They do a 2-hour walking tour. It doesn't cost anything, and they absolutely refuse to take any tips. It's just a group of about 90 volunteers, which began as an idea from the mayor of 1937, and it's been going that long. So the mayor's guides, if you come back to Bath at any point, make sure you go to the pump room, which is next to the Roman Baths entrance. You'll see this sign, and from 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, they'll do a 2-hour tour for nothing. These are council publications that were at the time when I was appointed in 2017, and you see nothing, nowhere, mention of World Heritage or the symbol. So this was at Machu Picchu. The one on the left is at Machu Picchu. I said to this guy that where he was standing, helping people, guiding people, I don't speak Peruvian, let alone Spanish. And so I'd said to him something really basic like, UNESCO, me UNESCO. Sorry, that's a bit pidgin Englishish, but I had no other way of communicating with him. I dragged out my business card and I said, could I take a photograph of your jacket with the badge on? And he couldn't have been prouder that somebody was actually asking him to photograph not just him, but the badge. This is in Porto, in Portugal. These are street lights. Street lights that light up you see them during the day, and at night you see them lit up. And the little arrow points to their World Heritage Site, which is the port wine warehouses on the River Douro. So it can be done. In ancient Sicily, of course, this is the sort of stuff that they did stuff which was entirely in keeping with their own architecture and city, their Italianate work. And I mention this because when I went to see that chief executive, it gave me the idea that I needed to get out there and talk to more people about World Heritage, and particularly why it was important in Bath and why it was important to our economy. And so I set out to devise a talk like this, which has been reviewed and rechanged and what have you, 69 times. So today is number 70. So I'm going to do 2 more because I'm 72, and then I think I'll stop. So what I was really saying, I've shown this talk or given this talk to over 3,600 people, and World Heritage, I believe, is now much more widely appreciated in Bath. It's certainly much more widely protected in Bath. And should any of you like what you're hearing and think it would be interesting for any clubs or societies that you're interested in, we don't charge for it, but what it would be nice, because you might live somewhere nice, and I would be perfectly happy to come and spend a day there, or bring my wife up, and gives us a reason to travel around the UK. or wherever you might be. So all we do is we charge £1 per person. And that money goes to the World Heritage Enhancement Fund, doesn't come to me. You people have very kindly offered to pay my expenses from Surrey, where we now live, but £1 a person. So this last hour or so has just cost you £1. And I hope you've enjoyed it, but I couldn't finish without talking about the fund. This fund was set up, as you can see, in 2009, and it's a fund that is organised by those three, my advisory board, as was the local council and the Preservation Trust. And we had a budget of we used to have a budget of £30,000 a year, but council savings made it £25,000 a year. And from this financial year, the council warned us that the budget was so tight they wouldn't be able to give us any money. So £5,000 comes from the Preservation Trust. And I said to them, well, what about the community infrastructure levy that developers pay when they want to build something in the city? It's called a CIL fund, Community Infrastructure Levy. And so they said, well, that's a good idea. We've got a committee that looks after that. So we had to make a presentation to the committee and it had to go through the council and all that kind of stuff. But they have at least now granted us £20,000 a year for the next 3 years. So they've allocated £60,000 for us. And that's hugely important because this is so true. The projects, we very rarely spend £5,000 on a project, obviously, when we have a budget of 25,000. Most of the projects cost less than £1,000. And we've done, I think, just over 70 projects in those years. Here's a really simple example. This here, if you go up the shopping street, which is Milsom Street, and you go to the top, and George Street is right in front of you, and you'll see some lovely steps because they're quite nice and artistically designed. And you can see that a vehicle has reversed into the bottom 3 railings. We said to the council, look, we will repair those railings, we'll get a mould made, because they're made of cast iron, and if you hit them hard, they're just going to fracture. We'll do that, provided you put a bollard just here to protect it, because it wouldn't be difficult, because you've got bollards all over the city, as you'll have seen. And they said, okay, we'll do that. So we got on and did it, more fool us, because as you can see, somebody else reversed into the funds that we put there and knocked those down too. So, that sort of, just replacing those railings would have cost somewhere between £1,000 and £1,200. And yet, putting them back makes a whole difference to that area rather than looking unloved. And so you can see we've leveraged our money over the years from 450,000 by bringing in a whole range of other money from other sources, mainly from heritage-based trusts and wealthy individuals. And this is perhaps the most prominent that you would know. Hopefully most people never even notice them. But the key here are these street signs. Now, as you can see, they're all slightly different. They're all done in a slightly different way. And this one here is the before, and this one here is the after. So what we did with this one was we got the house owner to accept that if we paid for it, could we put the rainwater pipe inside the house and box it in with insulation so you'll never know it's there. And they agreed. And we said, well, then we want to take this plat band, as it's called, this piece of stone across here, a plat band, and do it properly so that it's not a mess and your house will look that much smarter. And they were very keen. And then after it was commissioned and opened, they noticed that there was a little E here, a little tiny E. And that's because the original sculptor of this one spelt bell wrongly. And he had to go back and put a little E in. And so we put the little E in as well, because that seemed to make the most sense. And so it's hugely valuable as a project to the city. And the reason that people speculate on why you will notice these signs are all at first floor level. They're not down like most street signs are today. And the reason that I favour is because if you were rich enough to come to Bath in the season, you probably came in your own carriage rather than on the stagecoach, because the stagecoach could take 4 days, and that was a bit of a bumpy ride, to say the least. You had your own carriage. Now, who's driving your carriage? Your coachman, sitting up on top of the coach, where he needs to see the street signs to find his way. You're sitting inside all snug and warm. You just wait to get there. So you don't need to see the signs, but he does. And that's, we think, why they're at first floor level. Oops, go back, there you go. And just to say that we won an award for it from the Georgian Society in 2019 for the signs that we had restored at that time. And lastly is this amazing, this is Queen Charlotte's coat of arms. Now, Queen Charlotte was George III's wife. Queen Charlotte loved coming to Bath. She actually lived here for a while after the king died. She had 17 pregnancies. 13 of them made it to infanthood. I can't remember, I think it was 9 that actually grew to adulthood. I can't begin to imagine what 17 pregnancies may be like, but she loved coming to Bath. And this is above, if you were to go across Pulteney Bridge, just to the shops just beyond, and look up, you would see this beautiful coat of arms. It's over a chemist shop, right at the end before you get to what's called Laura Place, where the fountain is. And that was restored by 2 young female conservators in their mid-20s about 4 years ago, I suppose. That is one of the most expensive things we've done. That cost us £7,500 to do that. But we got an external trust to contribute a chunk of the money, and we got the chemist who owns the shop to donate a chunk of the money. And this used to be in Milsom Street. A long, long time ago, it used to be where, as you go down Milsom Street, the shopping street, on your right-hand side, there's a shop with 2 white columns, and that used to be a Glovers and Hatters. And that's why she gave it to them, and it sat outside the front. In fact, if you look very carefully, you can see where the fixings for it were. And her daughter, Charlotte, her coat of arms is right in front of you. If you go down Milsom Street, just as the road splits into 2 pedestrian pieces around a block, if you look up, you'll see it sitting up there. That's not as grand as that one, but because that's for the princess. That's Princess Charlotte's coat of arms. And my final statement is this. Pretty obviously, we're not our past, but we have to do something about our past, our heritage, in order to protect it for the future. And so I'm sure you will agree that it's a very worthwhile attempt to do that, and the city is absolutely beautiful. Thank you very much.
So Barry, thank you so much. That's absolutely fantastic. We've all learned so much about the wonderful city that we're meeting in this time. We are very pleased to make a small contribution to the endowment fund, as you referred to, and we're even more pleased to make a small consumable contribution to your future pleasure.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you. Thank you very much.